There being a quorum present and the time having reached 6:31, the meeting of the Master Plan Steering Committee will come to order. We'll call the roll, beginning with Marty and ending with the folks on Zoom.
Marty Crouch, present.
Rosie Kennedy, present.
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Dave Wanker, present.
Jack Lawrence, present.
Dana Alera, present.
Kristen Piper, present.
Lauren Lynch, present.
Excellent. We shall commence. Okay. We have a drop dead time tonight of 8 o'clock, at which point we've got to be out of here, which I think we can do. We've got some exciting news tonight, which I will summarize. We had a meeting a couple days ago with Joe and Sean and Patrick, Kristen and myself, and the feeling was that we're probably never going to get to the finish line at the rate we're going with Weston and Sampson. So the plan will modify effective immediately. It may have already modified, I don't know, Patrick knows, is the implementing agent here. But we will finish up our business with Weston and Sampson. We will get all of this editing that we've been doing ferociously in and into the documents, and get the maps all squared away, and the questionnaires collated. And I think that will complete their scope of business.
What we're going to have to do is essentially carve off part of the contract that we had with Weston and Sampson, as well as the money part, and hire another company. I know that Sean Farrell has communicated with many folks in the community, a number of folks on the committee as well, and he is of the belief there was sufficient frustration and disappointment that he felt like we really need to have a specialist who has public engagement skills, public involvement skills, and we are pursuing a person to do precisely that. This isn't really a kick at Weston and Sampson. We think that they've given us good product. It definitely has needed editing, but it would have with anyone. And I appreciate everyone's time that's been put into the editing and proofing. I know that, the way that we want to segment the work hereafter is to have basically existing conditions and that whole product of the reports that we've been working on to be completed by Weston and Sampson, and the new person / company would basically be doing the future planning as well as the public engagement part, which candidly speaking, Sean was of the opinion that there's simply not enough strength in Weston and Sampson's toolbox and skills to be able to consummate that in a way that people had confidence in it. So we're basically creating a two-step process with two different consultants. The second would be building on the work that the consultant Weston and Sampson has provided us, that we've been proofing over the last few months, and they'll take that, they'll build on it, and I'm hoping that the schedule's not going to take too big of a protraction. But I think that, given the fact that we need better focus in terms of what we're doing, where we're going, to get there, I think that this is a good move to make.
Can we reveal who the second act is with?
The desire is to hire a professional planner named Judy Barrett. She has worked with the community on a number of efforts over the years, including the last master plan, including preparation of our housing master plan, which we did with her and Jennifer Goldson back in 2018. So, she knows our community very well. She's got a thoughtful understanding of what Hamilton is as a community, which was one of the knocks that we had with Weston and Sampson, is that they just didn't spend enough time in Hamilton to thoroughly understand it. So, we haven't consummated a contract with Judy Barrett yet, but that's the direction that we want to go.
Can we just do that without issuing another RFP?
That's a good thought. I'll check into that to make sure.
Just because it's a substantial amount of money.
Yeah.
So are we open for comments?
We're going to be open for comment. I just want to throw in my 2 cents on this thing, if I might. I did work on the last master plan, and Judy Barrett spent a lot of time here and gained tremendous familiarity with this town, its culture, what makes up its hills and dales, and I think this is an excellent move. Jim, I think, gave it all he could. I have to say, quite honestly, that I think whoever wrote these chapters didn't do a very good job, and I finished up the 6 today, and every time I looked at another line, I said, God, this is illiteracy. So it's just unfortunate from that standpoint. And I have to say that in reading Judy Barrett's work from before, it would have been a very quick update from what she produced last time.
It was a very sensitive.
Yeah, Judy Barrett is she's a very capable person, and she's, as I say, the best part of it is she really knows this place. And we've got so much to pull together here. I mean, the form-based work and all the rest of it is just going to be absolutely critical to pulling all the pieces together. And with what the schools are about to go through, that's going to be another major thing. It's a critical moment for the town of Hamilton, and I think we desperately need somebody of that caliber. Plus, Kristen has had a lot of experience with Judy Barrett. She's worked with her and for her, I believe, at one point. So.
I've worked with her.
With her, sorry, I stand corrected. So, I think this is a good move all the way around. I like Jim's, too bad, but I don't think he had the thing. Shoot, Rosie.
So I'd just like to make a comment that I certainly, like several of us, spent a lot of time editing these 6 chapters, and and I question whether these chapters, in their current form, even with all our editing, are going to be sufficient to take us forward.
Well, that's a valid question. I would agree with you 100%.
Yeah.
What we're going to have to. I think we've all looked them over exhaustively at this point. And as Judy comes in, she's going to have put her fingerprints on this thing, I'm sure, and we'll be working on it at that point.
Okay. So
I didn't mean to
Can
interrupt.
oh, sorry, I have my hand raised whenever I can jump in.
Kristen Piper. Shoot.
Okay, now, thank you for this update. It's very helpful. I do just have one comment / concern. I think it's great that we're potentially bringing someone on who knows the town and has experience. However, given that it sounds like she was heavily involved in the former master plan, I just sort of want to keep in mind that our approach as a steering committee has been to get as far away from that existing master plan as possible, as far as, structure, and just there's just so much information. And I think as we were reading, the chapters, we were realizing that that was kind of headed in the same direction, where it's just super dense and a lot of data, and you read it and you're just like, why does any of this matter? And so I do just want to proceed a little cautiously and make sure that we are still aiming for that end product that we've been talking about since the beginning, which is something that is easily digestible. Everyone can read and enjoys reading and is excited about reading. And so I just want to keep that in mind. Regardless of who the next person is that helps us with this, I want to make sure that like our North Star, if you will, we maintain that and don't just kind of fall back on the way master plans were written in the past, because I think we've agreed that that doesn't work.
Well, the one point I would say is that none of these chapters went beyond the present, and that was to be done on every chapter at the end. And that's the stage I think we're now coming up to, which is going to be a very exciting stage.
So, some of them did not get up to the present.
Yeah, none of them, yeah, that's right.
No, that's,
Yeah.
I actually agree very much both with Lauren and with what Rosie said regarding the concern about whether or not these existing chapters
Are useful.
are really useful. I think that's a valid concern. I share that as a concern. I guess my concern would be more, how do we pull out what is useful in these chapters? Because I wouldn't really say there's nothing here, but just how do we, I guess to sort of back up a little bit, I don't disagree with, and I am certain that my feedback to Sean would be very similar to what other people, I don't disagree. I have a little bit of, I'm a little hesitant about how to say this, but I think we're all grown-ups. I think that there was a lot of, I had a lot of concerns about the consultant, and I also have a lot of concerns about the functionality of our group. So I just want to, I don't have a solution, but I just want to acknowledge that I think we all need to take some ownership additionally. If we're going to be the same group, and I think maybe that's an if, I don't know. I think we need to acknowledge that I didn't feel that we were a particularly smooth running group, and that was partially the consultant. But I think we need to take some ownership of that. That's just.
Thank you so much, Dana, for raising that. I completely agree. And I think when you were first delivering the news, Jack, my initial thought was, is this an opportunity to change the membership of this group? Is it time to solicit new members? Would that set us back even further? I don't know. But that was the first thing that crossed my mind. So thank you for raising that.
So, Jack, may I suggest that the decision having been made, we look forward and initially try to determine, once the decision is made, if it requires a new request for proposals, it's going to set us back a bit more in time. But whenever the new person comes on, we ought to have ready a process of our meeting and becoming familiar with her and expressing our concerns about her role, about our role, and just get going instead of dwelling on the past. But I do agree that the current chapters, some of which, as I said, did not even get up to current existing conditions, they all need reworking. Will that be part of her job, Patrick, or is that going to remain with Weston and Sampson?
The way that we have spoken about this, and I need to see what your thoughts are as to what you think is unacceptable, because I think there's a lot of good quality work there. And I don't want to be throwing, you know, the baby out with the bathwater, because there's a lot of decent workable product there. And, you know, I get that people have some discomfort with some of the product, but you know, I've read through every single chapter. Yes, I know there's editing that's needed to
Right.
be done, as would have been the case had any consultant prepared it for us. But our thought process was to have the committee and Weston and Sampson finalize the existing conditions, and then, you know, have the next consultant focusing on the engagement, the future conditions, you know, public involvement, those kinds of things that, you know, Weston and Sampson just hasn't had or exerted strength at.
Right.
Then
So,
you're suggesting that we keep on our prior schedule of having submitted the edits to Weston and Sampson, they're coming back with redrafts,
Yes.
and then are getting that to us prior to the 25th? Is that correct?
today, well, it's 11th, today, we're supposed to have all our comments in, and then Weston and Sampson were to review it after this deadline, was my understanding.
Right. We're still working under
Right.
that,
Yeah,
But
that guideline.
would they get their rework to us in advance of the 25th?
yeah. We just make one
I-
statement.
I'll make sure that that happens.
So,
If there's a weakness, if I may, in the, aside from the exposition, the writing style, I think one of the problems is that much of the data is dated, badly dated.
and it's very generic
2009,
as
2000,
well,
you know,
right,
way back when.
right.
And there's, one of the things that's in the old plan that is not in this plan is some of the trends in population ages, for example, starting, you know, some years back, and, you know, seeing some of those trends as they've developed and where we are today.
Right.
And we're missing the where we are today in many of those. And I think demographically, it's very important to understand what comprises the community today. I
Right,
mean,
the
I don't even know
MAPC.
what real percentage.
Can I just ask about the structure of today's meeting, where you, as the chair, see, in other words, how do you think we have, you know, a little over an hour? Do you want us to, I mean, I hear you're addressing like a specific concern about a specific chapter. Do you want us to go through that? Like, what do we want to do with our, like, we have an agenda. I know this sort of was throwing us off a little bit because we have a whole new thing to take in, but do you envision, like, let's dive into a couple of these chapters and go through them? Or what do we want to do with our time today?
I think we're really just collecting everybody's thoughts today at this shift and what they feel the priorities are in the course of the next steps here to integrate, to finish off and to integrate a new approach.
One second.
And where the weaknesses may or may not lie that we
Yeah.
should see.
So I would just like to reiterate that regardless of what Weston and Sampson and Jim, lovely person, delivers to us in terms of the chapters, I still believe that they won't be in final form. And I think we do need to, as Jack was saying, refer to the 2004 plan for some very important trends, there is a lot of important data, and I think that Judy would be able to do that. So I just want to make sure that it's clearly understood that I don't think that we're going to have finished, completed chapters from Weston and Sampson. I think they just need so much work. And I'm certainly agreed that there is some valid work that's been done there, so I totally agree, don't want to throw it out, but just that it will need some further editing from perhaps somebody who is more experienced in this field. Sorry, I took the microphone from Barney.
No, I think The weakness that I observed, in addition to the lack of an outline, was that Jim, who I agree was very well-meaning, he was not a leader. And of all the information that one could gather, the quote-unquote existing conditions is probably the simplest. And the really hard work is identifying goals, recommendations, and how to implement the recommendations. And I think the predicate of that is an intimate knowledge of the community and an ability to write coherently and compellingly. And I didn't see any of that in the drafts that Weston and Sampson provided, but I do think that the 2004 master plan demonstrated quite a profound knowledge of Hamilton, its history, what its citizens aspired to and what they valued. And I think that I think that if we have someone who can actually lead this committee, I don't think it's a question of the members not being cohesive. I think we lack leadership. And I don't think it's up to the members of the committee to actually try and formulate the goals, the recommendations, and the implementation strategies. Rather, I think that the consultant has to discern from the trends and the information provided possible goals, possible recommendations, and possible implementations. So if you're presented with, say, a choice of 5, we can then analyze that and have a fruitful discussion about it, and then someone who knows Hamilton can then proceed to write that up in a coherent fashion. But Jim seemed to say, what do you want? You know, it was too open, and none of us, you know, there wasn't sufficient structure. So if you've ever, like, chosen fabric, usually a decorator says, here are 3 samples, choose 1. Or here are your options, choose 3. But I think it's up to the consultant to provide the overall structure and really help the committee coalesce to discern what the town wants based on the surveys that we have before us. So I think that given my reading of the 2004 master plan, which I thought was very well done, I think that Judy Barrett might be one of the few people who could pick up the pieces and help us move forward. And I think she could, you know, if you have an understanding and a strategy, you could take those chapters, really, you know, do with them what you will, and then go forward. Because I found that a lot of the information pertinent to existing conditions was just fluff. It didn't move the goalpost anywhere. It was just there. So what? I mean, what road in Hamilton changed since 2004?
It hasn't changed very much. It really hasn't changed very much.
Well, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So why are we wasting our time on this stuff? I mean, there's, well, how many new roads in Hamilton since 2004? I can't think of any.
The idea was just kind of bring everybody up to
Well, I
the same
understand
starting
that, but,
point.
you know, it's not like it has to be this exhaustive. You know, I think if you live here a month, you know the MBTA, you know Route 1A, you know Highland Street, and Bob's your uncle. I mean,
Yeah.
we're kind of spinning our wheels on information that doesn't drive decision-making. And so I think someone who has a much deeper understanding of the town can really, if they take the bull by the horns, guide this committee in a direction.
Yeah.
So I think, if I may, to answer Dana's question as well as jump off Marnie and what something Kristen said, is I think what's important for us as a committee to talk about tonight, knowing we're kind of pivoting, is we've looked at all of these chapters. There's some of us who've commented outside of the Google Drive. I think we should have Weston and Sampson update to reflect the comments we've made so far, so we at least have a package that, you know, we've spent time reviewing, commenting on that, figure out kind of these kind of quote existing conditions documents of data, or maybe they're the data packets that then we take and move forward into the public process and to then establish our goals and what we want to get out of this. But knowing we're kind of pivoting, I think it's important to kind of figure out what we want out of what we know we already have and what that looks like in the product before we move it over. And then what is the scope? I know we've talked a lot about we need to do more public engagement, and I think we all agree we want to do that. But what is the scope and the goal in this kind of second phase? And to Marnie, your point of looking at the vision and the goals, but how do we use what we have to then scope out the next phase of this process appropriately? Because we weren't part of that first initial scoping, and not that that was good or bad, it's just we're where we are. And I think we've learned a lot that we can take from here to then give ourselves roles and responsibilities, as well as understand what the consultant's roles and responsibilities. So I guess I think it would be helpful today to talk a little bit about where we feel these chapters, or at least baseline data information, sit, and what we want to make sure gets completed here for Weston and Sampson's piece, and then figure out what we need as part of this project in the second, in this kind of different direction.
I think Emil's outline that we discussed at the last meeting
Right.
really should be the starting point of what we do. Because I think that outline was, well, I hate to use the word brilliant, but it was pretty brilliant. It was really, well, maybe I don't hate to use the word brilliant, but it really, I think, is a way of capturing, a vision for the community in a way that people can really relate to.
We did vote on it at the
We
last
did vote
meeting,
on
that
it,
it would be
yes.
our structure. So
So-
technically it is until
Well,
we,
and it's one of the
take that one
few
back.
things, it's one of the few things that we could say to an incoming person. And if it were up to me, what I would say is we voted on this, people agreed with it, we feel really good about it, and we would value your thoughts.
Well,
Because I wouldn't want, if the consultant were to say, there's some part of this that I think should be, slightly, in other words, I think we want to say it provides structure. And also, I mean, to Marnie's point, I want to agree with you strongly and then disagree a little bit about, I feel very strongly that what we need is a consultant who's going to come in and be a leader and guide us. I actually a little bit disagree that the person necessarily needs to know a ton about Hamilton. I think a good leader could use the knowledge in the room to create a vision. I don't think it's worth arguing about. I don't, but what I'm saying is I think a good leader can pull out the wisdom of the group who has a lot of knowledge about Hamilton.
the trick is to write it up. And
I agree with you.
And when you go to write it up, if you don't have that kind of intimate knowledge of a community, which I think is reflected in the 2004 master plan, it's really difficult to get that nuance. I mean, it's easy enough to write facts, but it's hard to write sentiments. And especially when you have a survey where people's, they're kind of dealing with feelings, and it's not facts.
Yeah, no,
So
I-
you have to kind of understand the community and its history to be able to actually produce recommendations and implementation strategies that will actually work, given your knowledge of, say, how town hall works, no elevator, for example, but, in any number of ways, just the personalities and the way the town
I mean,
is.
I agree. It needs to be, can I feel like I'm on the, but I have a question. Does this group agree with what Marnie said? Is that what we want, is a consultant who is going to be a leader of the group? Because I feel like, I feel like early on, which was before Marnie was even here, that I suggested that I wanted the consultant to sort of take a little bit more charge, and I feel like the group said, no, we don't want that. Maybe that, I'm just going to put it out there that I'm not sure that this group is in agreement that we want a consultant who is going to take a leadership role in the group.
I think we need a stronger facilitator.
Yeah, that's
Among
exactly
us.
the word I was going to
Yeah.
use.
I mean, it's just to,
I would agree with
to
that.
have, to better balance our voices to ourselves. I mean, and I think that's really the key piece that,
That's probably a better word than
A
leader, but a
facilitator, yeah,
facilitator
I
who
think
who can really set forth options and really assist the group in coming together. Because everyone has different ideas, but there might be similarities and differences, and you can coalesce around a concept and pull ideas together. You know, Emil, you have probably more experience with this than anyone. I think you should express your thoughts on this as to whether a stronger facilitator would be something that would really help this master plan get into a draft form that we can actually evaluate.
Yes, please.
Sorry.
Well, I do agree with that. I think we need a strong facilitator on this. Actually, that's the right word, I think. And I, agree with a lot of the comments. Dana's comment, they don't have to be an expert on Hamilton, but this person certainly is. The only thing I would, and I like Kristen's early comments on this as well, where master plans that written 20 years ago, 25 years ago are very different from what you see now being out there. So I would hope that much more populated, more animated in terms of the presentation, the graphics and so forth. They're much more interesting documents and very concisely written. That was not the 2004 master plan, but I do agree that the writing in that is exactly what this master plan needs. So I was very impressed with what I read in the 2004 master plan. The only caution I would have is proceeding, I guess it was decided that Judy Barrett would be the person, and I'm okay with that because her familiarity with the town also and the, how the town works and so forth. But if there is to be an RFP to go out, I would hope that the steering committee could be involved in it at this point, and not and get a better understanding of what the commitments are in terms of the facilitator, the consultant, and what is this committee going to be doing. I think that was missing in,
Totally.
frankly, in the Weston and Sampson.
We did make that
Arrangement.
point the other day, that we had a vote on the committee.
And I would even say,
Meetings are gonna be made, we need to be there, and
I would hope
and we
also
need
that,
to talk about the scope of whatever this is. And I agree with you completely.
yeah. The other thing would be, if we can meet Judy Barrett maybe before she's commissioned, to do that. I don't know whether that's possible, or she's willing to do it. But just to get familiar with that and get an understanding, actually speak with her about what her ideas are about what a master plan these days looks like and how she would pick up the pieces. I would think that would be a very interesting exchange where we can ask her questions and just get a better feel of whether this is going to be a good fit, because I would not like to go through this again.
no,
Yeah.
absolutely not.
Let me say again that we don't have Ms. Barrett on contract. We haven't gone through that process. There's a certain amount of protocol that we need to work through. There would need to be a solicitation process,
Yeah.
just to fit with Mass General, all that good stuff.
Right.
So, one of the big efforts that I've communicated to Weston and Sampson they need to do is, since they haven't billed us since May, we need an understanding of what we have left.
Yeah.
That's
So,
Pardon me, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Could I just, Patrick, I know it's a sensitive topic because you and I have been around it
yes, sir.
in terms of the town manager's role and your role as his representative here versus the committee. But I think the committee is expressing a desire to be engaged in the selection process, just to put it bluntly, and to be able to pose questions and exchange views with Ms. Barrett or whomever else may be in the picture. So I know that collides somewhat with the view of the town manager's prerogative. I think we ought to straighten that out so we get started on a square footing without acrimony. Just let's understand just how much we'll be able to participate from the get-go. And by that I mean the identity of the facilitator or consultant, whatever the label. So I don't know if you can comment on that dispositively tonight, but would you take that back to Joe?
Absolutely. I think that was very well put. And I think it's important to better delineate expectations of all parties, of this group, of the consultant, of the town administration as well, in a way that's more productive than what we have been for the last year. And I hope we can focus on, trying to do it in a more productive manner that uses our talents better than what we have. And I think having a focused facilitator who lays out expectations of the committee, of myself, etc., I think it is really important to do. And I don't think that we've had that element. So I truly get your point, and I will convey that to the town manager.
I appreciate that, and that, if that gets in place, that I think will encourage a better quality of participation by the committee. Because we'll get off on the right foot, we will have an understanding of what's expected of everybody. So I appreciate your willingness to do that. Could I just get us back in the 50 minutes we have to what we're going to do with Weston and Sampson? Because I agree that the writing of the chapters was terrible. So factual matter, one thing, but its presentation is quite another. Our edits don't amount to rewrites. So what the product we're going to get prior to the 25th most likely will continue with the lack of quality in terms of writing. So what do we do about that? Who's going to be layered in after the edits are inserted to make sure that it's a readable, presentable product that will have our names on it?
Could I jump in? Yeah, I have the same question, and I thought I heard Kristen Kasner say something about like data packets. I mean, it almost feels like to me what we've gotten is not chapters, it's data that the new consultant can then hopefully utilize as, a great starting place where a lot of information lives. But to Marnie's point, like pull out the actionable, useful decision-making portions of it, because right now we have a lot that feels just verbose and heavy and not structured, and fit it into Emil's outline that we've agreed to adopt. And that would be one option, I guess, in my mind.
Yeah, and I think, and that's why I brought up kind of that data packet idea, because we don't need to have all of this in the section that people open up the front page and read. This can be Appendix C of a lot of this information, but it's informative if you want to know. And also some of this, I'm just looking at the unemployment rates I have up right now, but it's like, okay, what does this mean over time, and what does this mean specifically for Hamilton in comparison to around us? Is there something specific here we should know? So I do like where they draw a conclusion on the data. So this is the data, you should look at this. This is unique in comparison with something else. But the more kind of the story and narrative around it, I don't think is as critical as the data piece. So, and as we move into the outline of protect, provide, and grow and implementation, this doesn't need to be part of what people pick up and read, but it's part of what informs what people, that piece that's going to be the plan that we march forward with. So I think this is important, and I think we should figure out what this is so we can finish the data piece. And then figure out, so just, and not necessarily all tonight, but the scope of where we want to go with this data into the new format and where we want to go with engagement from there. I mean, that's what I would recommend.
One of the analogies that I've heard used often that I think is really appropriate here is when you build a house, you have rough carpenters, you have finished carpenters. What we have are rough carpentry products. And I think for, appendix material, I think with the editing, it's perfectly fine. I don't think it's the literary narrative that we're looking for that a real master plan needs to set you down and make you want to read it. That is the product that we really need.
Yeah, for existing conditions, I think that's right. But I think it should live in the appendix too. It should not be what you open up and read as a first.
So I'm not sure what to
This
do
doesn't
with.
need to be a telephone book. It needs to be something people want to read.
Oh, Go, I think you're going to say what I want to say. Go ahead.
Perhaps. As an example, in the town services, they cite tables of organization and equipment, which I think is outdated, is not accurate. So one could either go to the police chief, the fire chief, to DPW and get the correct data, or leave it out. I don't know how to handle that kind of thing. That's probably not what you were going to.
Well, no, what I thought you were going to say is I don't really, the last part, I don't know how to handle it. I like what Kristen is saying, but I guess I want you to sort of lead us in like, okay, what do you want to do next to get to where you're saying? Because I'm not sure how we get to, like to give them constructive information about what we actually, like.
Well, I think, I mean, I apologize for missing the last meeting, but I know 2 meetings ago, we talked about, okay, what we want to get information up to the public. So we need to make sure that what we're seeing in terms of data is correct, it's consistent, and, is it, in what form do we want to have it put together so we can get it out there so people, to Jack's point, that we're all kind of reading the same information so we can make informed decisions. I'm not exactly sure, and I don't want to dictate what we do next, but I think to think about, there's been a lot of data collection, and I think we need to figure out what other data collection is still needed. As mentioned, some of it, is it out of date? Is it correct? I mean, obviously we need to fix that, and that's what we need. Is that something for Weston and Sampson to still do and correct? I think if there's something that needs to be corrected, they need to correct it. I think the mapping pieces are something that we need to make sure we get up to date. Because we've been looking at them and working and editing on them for so long. So, yeah, I'm not sure. And in terms of, I think we need to agree kind of what form do we want this information to be. And I think we're kind of having that good conversation about, is this just a data packet or is it a narrative of where we are? And then.
Yeah, I don't think we need a list of the trucks in the fire department, for example. There's some of this data is really superfluous to what we're trying to do. And I hate to keep coming back, but the 2020 census was 2 years ago. And there's no data in here that's really up to, I mean, I really want to know who's living in town now. Anecdotally, I can look around and think the town's a very different place today than it was in 2004. But I don't really know that that's the case. Now, I would hope Judy would be more up to snuff, or whoever is more up to snuff on who's around here, you know? I mean,
It's
do we have
different
the conventional wisdom, we have an aging population. Well, I don't think we do. I think aging population is a self-rectifying aspect of life. all those people who were aging, part of the aging population back in 2004, I guess that was me, but anyway, I mean, I'm still here. But I don't know, I mean, there are all kinds of young people who have filled in behind here now. And, you know, they've got, I'm sure, Dana, you've got a lot of this in the schools because, you know, you're planning what's gonna happen to your student population and all the rest of that kind of stuff. And we don't have any of that in this data, really, except that there's no plan for an increased school body. I just don't feel that we're looking at the population as in a realistic way.
So don't we have to decide what we're going to do with Weston and Sampson? And when their money is cut off, they're going to stop working. I mean, we have to come to some understanding as to exactly what's left on their plate.
You know, as per my discussion with the group yesterday, I took that information, and that discussion basically had me telling Weston and Sampson, finish up with the edits, finish up with the existing conditions texts, and you know, continue with the edits as we provide those to you on existing conditions as well as on the maps. So
And the
that was the
surveys?
direction.
The survey data is, do you think they're gonna be able to do that?
Yeah, as I understand it, we don't have
Well, it
a
should be.
survey set of questions that's been completed, correct?
Well, we have a couple of them, but they're pretty much alike. I mean, there's certainly a lot of fixed items in the surveys that, I mean, there was one version of the survey that had one other question on it. But basically, the whole front end of the survey was the same in all cases.
In all the electronic surveys, they can tabulate quickly. I mean, it's the 67 paper surveys that will take a little while to input, but,
That should identify some trends, anyway.
But, you know, didn't we talk about feeling that that survey was incomplete, and so that we spent time writing a second survey and submitted that for the group comments and for Jim's comments? Where's that? It's like fallen into a black hole. We, as a group, felt strongly that we don't have sufficient information via a survey, right? So that's something that should be followed through on. It shouldn't just fall off the face of the earth. Because that first survey was so, it was very, very nebulous. It was unclear, the structure. What are you asking? How it was asked was just very confusing. So I think that second survey, and as a new person comes on board, perhaps with more experience or able to zero in on the information they're looking for, perhaps they would want to help edit it. But that's something that we should pass on to the second consultant.
and I think that's part of the public engagement conversation.
Agreed.
Exactly.
But I don't think, I think we ask people to do the survey, whether or not it's the most valuable, we're gonna learn something from
Yes.
the results, and, I mean, they're gonna be qualitative in some form. So I think it's important to tabulate them, and we still have more to do, but.
Right,
To
right.
at least figure out what people said the first round.
Right, I'm not saying to disregard it. What I'm saying is more needs to be done in terms of surveying
yeah,
the public.
I
That
totally
was my point.
But I think there was
And
a
I
lot
think
of good
that's an
information.
example of, I think what Dana was sharing earlier, which is like, that's on us. That was something we took the lead on, and, you know, we wanted to do a second survey, and Emil, you know, I think, and the Rosie took a lot of time to work on it. But I think that's an example of where the steering committee needs to be more organized on the decisions we're making and the things we're taking the lead on, and making sure that we're following up and we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. Because again, with the chapter review, I mean, Weston and Sampson had some of those chapters up months ago, and I never, I looked at them all last night. So that's on me. Like that's terrible. Like I should have reviewed it the first time, they put it up there. So I do think we need to have a conversation at some point about our responsibilities as a committee, holding each other accountable and having some sort of leadership structure or accountability structure that makes sure we're tracking decisions, we're following up on action items that we talk about, and not just letting things, fall by the wayside, because we're all busy, but we've also made this commitment to be on this committee, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Kristen. And I just want to thank you for the initiative that you took to send out those reminders. I found that very helpful.
with the links. Oh my goodness. So
yeah, exactly. I mean,
so
seriously,
helpful.
small things like that really make a big difference. It just facilitates ease in achieving like what we have said we are going to do and following through with our commitments. Yeah.
Good. I'm glad it was helpful and not obnoxious.
Oh, it was so helpful. I think.
Good. Well, it made me finally do it, so it works for me.
Can I ask?
But the surveys the whole front end of the survey were constant in all versions. And I think that's worthwhile to get that, if we can get, Weston and Sampson to tabulate that part of it. It would really help to make sure that if in the second survey effort here, we don't just repeat all the stuff that we asked in the first one. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of other things that everybody wants to know here, and I think we have to dig in with what we've got. Now, what they're going to do if they just say, "See you later, guys," that's going to be a problem. But I think that's one of those things that it would be very useful to have.
Well, I thought that Patrick said that we expect that they're going to tabulate and provide us with that, right? So that's our expectation from them. Can I ask a practical question? This is also about expectations from Weston and Sampson. Jack, when you were just talking about all that data about the population,
Yeah.
I know that they presented all of that data to us. We sat there and yet and maybe somebody's going to be, I don't know where it is in these documents. So does anyone else, because
I can't find it. I think the demographic profile is critical to have.
Correct. So that raises an alarm for me, because I wanted to pull it up, because I was going to say, I think that we really do know that, and they did give us that information, but I don't see it here.
Well, Eric did some comparisons.
So no, but I'm not actually talking about whether you think it's wrong or whether you think it's right. What I'm saying is,
We need it.
we need to be able to see it, because we can't have a productive conversation about that data unless we have it in front of us. And I'm on the Google Doc. I don't see in their files where that is. And yet I know they presented it to us. I remember that presentation. So that's just a concern from my point of view. I didn't see it necessarily in the moment. And Jack, you expressed that you had concerns about how accurate that data was.
And dated.
That's fine. My memory was more just that I remember seeing it, and some of it was interesting. And I'd like to be able to have a knowledgeable conversation about it with you, rather than me sort of saying, well, I think it seemed like it made sense, and you saying, I think it seemed like it was dated. That's not a useful conversation.
Oh, no, it's not a useful conversation at all.
So we need to have that data.
In a tabular form that, that.
We should get all of Weston and Sampson's work product. We paid for it. So whatever they have, in whatever format, we should have it.
Yeah.
And whatever's on Google Docs, that link is frightening.
Well, the Google Drive, the one that I have at least, has...
I can't find stuff on it.
Well, Google Drive is like that. But the folder that they provided us has, it has all the chapters, but it doesn't have, in other words, it's got some things about meeting materials and things, but the chapters are actually, at least in mine, easy to find, but the rest of it is not.
Right.
But we don't have the maps, and we don't have
Correct.
the meeting presentations.
Correct.
And
So
that's,
we
I think,
should-
where
we
I'm
should
having
have
trouble
all their
following
work
along.
product, all of it, because they have no use for it anymore.
Right.
And we might, or their.
Well, certainly,
request might, find information that they've accumulated and may not have formatted in a way that's presentable to us, but it might be useful to someone else.
Right. Well, and my gut is like the only reason that I hadn't thought of that until this moment. Like when Jack started talking about that data, I started to think, oh, well, wait a minute, I remember that, and I'm digging through trying to find it. There's undoubtedly other things that are like that too, that they presented to us but aren't actually represented in this work product that should be, or at least should be provided to us, even though maybe it doesn't make it into the master plan, but it should be
No, but it's
provided to us.
Right. It's back up to how we got to some place.
Correct.
We'll get that unearthed and sent around.
Yeah.
Right,
and-
but I wouldn't say, oh, it's just the demographic data. We want it,
No,
there's
it's-
undoubtedly other
Yeah,
data as well.
Right.
yeah.
Right.
Including a lot of product that Caroline had worked on with us early on about getting a list of important stakeholders in Hamilton and contacts and some of the early sign-in sheets and anything that, anyway, there was a product that we had been working on that I feel like I just haven't seen for a couple of months. And I know we've talked to Jim about it. Because we want to we haven't followed up. We're not having a two-way conversation with the public at all.
Right,
We're
right.
taking in information and then not saying, hey, thank you for filling this out. This is what we've learned. Yeah, and I just think, and people, once they engage, and then you don't engage back, they just don't engage.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't want to lose the momentum of
Right. Do we
what
have?
we have, but I want to, keep it going.
Yeah. So I think I had spoken to you about resident who came to the block party and was very upset because there was no return communication from us after the engagement session. So we have that list somewhere, don't we? The emails of all the people who came to that session, or does Jim have that?
From the November, I don't
Yeah.
have the November sign-in.
Okay.
I think well, that's the thing, like we scanned,
It might be an email somewhere, but that's right when the whole
yeah.
Caroline's switch happened. It might be emailed. We could go back, but I just went in the Google Drive and I don't see anything
Yeah, and I have the
related
Google
to
Drive
that.
open. And then when we did the shop local, I think we scanned those and sent them. Anyway, it's just there was product and people that I think we need to make sure we
Right,
retain.
right, right.
So when we do get into more public engagement, we're reaching back out.
So on a happy note, there's going to be another Shop Local celebration in September, and I don't know if we want to take that on to
Yes.
go and make ourselves visible again. Yeah, I thought that was a very successful endeavor when we did it last time.
They're going to be asking about the dog park and the bowling alley.
Those are those adorable 8th graders. They asked about the bowling alley.
Yeah, and we got Kristen Piper, we got to figure out where we are on that one.
The bowling alley?
No, engaging young people in this process, which is super exciting, and those
So
eighth boys
I was
are
actually
fantastic.
I just realized, my husband did send out the results of the survey, but I think it was only sent to Kristen, Jack, Jim, and Patrick. So I will send it out to the whole group so you guys can see. We have plenty of middle school feedback.
I don't remember
Awesome.
getting it.
Love it. That's so good.
I do remember the dog park and the bowling alley, and
Well, I think I said
Or
that, right.
entertainment.
I said this before, but right, those are great answers because you want to say like, that's exciting. What would those things bring to the community? Because the answer is not really that it might not have anything to do with bowling, right? You want to, like, what is it that you want? Like, why would you want that? What would you do there? And you could find exciting things. I mean, those are great answers, because what they might be saying is we want a place we don't want to have to travel to, another Beverly or whatever to hang out. We actually want to hang out in town.
Somewhere I can ride my bike to.
Right, exactly. And or anyway,
I don't even know, do we have a skateboard park?
we do not, as far as I
Beverly
know.
does.
Right, and anyway, that's something that I think a good facilitator, that's what you want to do
Right.
with a question like that, or an answer like that. Like, a bunch of people want a bowling alley. Oh, that's terrific. Why? like, and pull out what it is that they dream of doing in a bowling alley.
I thought bowling was dead, to tell you the truth.
Well, apparently it's not, because the cool kids came by and said they wanted a bowling alley. They were 8th graders. Oh, God, they were so cute.
Well, my recollection is that, 8th, 9th grade, you can't really go on a date, but you can go bowling.
Right, you can, right,
The opposite sex.
right, exactly. I mean, and it might really be like,
Dating.
right, we want safe places that our parents allow us to go to because it's not far away, it's not dangerous, we can go on our own. We don't know. I can make up all kinds of stories. We don't know. We need to ask them,
Right,
why
but
is it
get
that you
there.
want that?
Yeah, I mean, on my street, when they bring the big dirt pile to Pingree Park, there's these these kids that bring their shovel from their shed, and they're on their bikes, and they build these ramps at Pingree with just
I
the
remember.
dirt. And it's so cute, but I mean, it's just, they're like, yeah, this is awesome, but,
Amazing, and that's pretty inexpensive on the town budget to build a dirt pile, right?
right, but then they're probably not super happy the kids are making ramps in the dirt pile.
Oh, come on, that's a dirt pile.
Yeah.
I can imagine the guy trying to take care of the park, and he's got dirt piles all over the place.
I don't know, I think half of these parents
Tim's
would
gonna
think
be
it was a
grumpy
great
about that.
idea.
Could be.
So from where we've been so far and what we know about the project and direction and I mean, I don't know, are there things that you have all been sitting here and saying, I really wish I was part of the early scoping and we should do X? Is there anything specific as part of that? And Kristen, engaging younger people, I think that's a really good perspective and a good addition. Is there things like that just sitting here, you guys have felt this would be great if we only could, do? As we think about how we get to continue on.
I am hopeful that part of the end product will identify 2, 3, 4 specific goals that we would hope Hamilton could aspire to and accomplish in the next 10 to 20 years. Instead of a laundry list, instead of a large wish list, just some nice, discrete, identifiable, reasonable goals.
I agree, and what kind of a
Well-
thing would that be like? Would it be like, what would a goal look like?
So one thing would be adopting the model approach in terms of planning. I would like to see more concentration on climate change issues. I think Jack wants to see more effort in terms of integrating Hamilton with other communities in terms of
Regionalizing.
services.
So when you say a specific goal, would you want it to say, Hamilton will
Well,
create X amount of, green energy or would it be more, we'd like to focus more on climate change?
for example, I had suggested to Jim in a non-Google email avenue, when he had those list of goals under municipal services, I said to him in the email, many of these are already being done by various committees and boards. We don't have to repeat that. That's a waste of space. But, for example, water issues, climate issues, suggest that the select board appoint with a specific charge, a group of citizens with expertise in these subjects. So that's getting us somewhat, advancing us a bit in terms of these subjects. So climate change, I read articles about planting more trees or stuff like that, but I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that there be a process in place which will lead to specific approaches. So that's one idea.
I wonder if we think about it a little bit more, since we're in the master plan higher level, of the things we need to be thinking about when making a decision. Like when you're making a decision on new vehicles. Okay, how does that fit in the budget? How does that fit for the users? How does that fit for our climate change objectives? So does that, I don't know, just kind of the higher level questions that we're making sure we're asking in all, that follow through a thread of all decision making?
But we have in place now committees, the Capital Committee, the FinCom with a budget, Conservation. I mean, many of these subjects are already part of the charge of existing committees. I don't think we have to double on that. So I'm suggesting as to topics, new approaches.
The having 3 or 4 specific goals, I think, is really important, actually. I mean, master planning is obviously a much longer, we're looking many, many years into the future, but I do think I really do. I mean, on the school committee, it was transformative last year for us to, we printed a poster and physically brought the goals, the district goals, into the meeting, every meeting, because it allowed us periodically to be like, wait, how does whatever we're talking about fit that?
Right. And that's exactly what I'm talking about.
And so I think that was just like that physical. Now, obviously, we were only looking at 1 year, so it's a little bit different. But like that was a help. And I could imagine exactly what you're saying, that could help the select board or other committees in years to come to say, when you're having a discussion, how does what we're talking about right now fit into those goals? Which is,
Right, well, just not narrowly thinking about things. I mean, I agree there are all these separate boards that have their mission, but they also only see what's in their purview to see. Whereas how are we looking at this more broadly as we think about where we're going?
One thought I also have, I wonder if it would be helpful, and I feel like we may have asked Weston and Sampson to do this, but to have the new consultants, highlight a few recent master plans, not in great detail, but really like pull out some of the key recommendations that they come away with to give us a specific flavor about what types of recommendations we would be striving to make. And we can dissect those and say, this is not the direction we want our master plan to go, but just to have something concrete that we are looking at where we want to end up, I would find that to be very helpful.
Yeah, would be.
I mean, but to jump off that, for each of us sitting here, what is it that our hope is to get out of this process? I mean, obviously have a plan, but my hope would be to have a plan that every decision in the community, people are thinking about how does it, to get out of just their box, but how does it, our job of kind of having people think about the whole and the whole of impact, and every decision, every small decision, small and big decision affects that in the direction we're moving in. And I hope we can outline something that can be used easily to inform those decisions and guide some of those decision making.
I think, with this transition to another facilitator, we can kind of re-examine, are we still after a very comprehensive plan townwide, which is kind of a very general look at a lot of things, or make it more issue-oriented, look at specific things maybe that, looking back at the 2004 plan, could have been done differently, or other issues like climate change and resiliency, especially. How is the community going to react now with the evidence of climate change better? That's something that wasn't even in existence 20 years ago. Nobody was thinking of that, but because that's a different way to do it. Instead of looking at everything in the big picture, maybe there's sufficient information already, because there have been housing studies, there have been open space studies, not in the distant past, whether, as David was saying, you pick out a bunch of them, maybe helped by the facilitator or the consultant, maybe that's another direction to take at this stage, and still have all the existing information in place. That's all useful. But that's just a thought, that
Well,
this
yeah.
would be a natural place to change if that's
Existing
the
information,
focus.
I think, has helped us understand that picture of some of those things that might be rising to
Yeah,
the top of kind of the issues.
I think those 2 points are really well taken, because I'm just, as we speak, going through the 2004 master plan. And for example, there is a summary of master plan recommendations and implementation sequence, and it's quite lengthy. And just glancing through it, I see that virtually none of the recommendations were
Right.
implemented. So I think that the goal should
Be concrete.
to have fewer and perhaps broader goals and craft them for the specific problems that the town faces,
right.
but not try and get too into the weeds, because, say, for example, we're how many years out from the 2004 master plan? So if you go to it at this juncture, you can get some guiding principles from it, but you're not actually going to be looking at the implementation. They're outdated at this point. So the kind of the more generalized concepts will engender flexibility over the years until the next master plan.
Right.
So I
That's
think
right.
that's right.
Yeah,
And
that's
and
right.
really, there's no point addressing, problems that are insoluble or problems that may or may not arise. But if we identify the very issues that we want to address, to your point, and have goals that are generalized enough, then the facilitator can craft ideas how to actually implement solutions to those. And I really do kind of like the idea of the form-based plan being a part of the master plan, and also, we are starting to address climate change, but that is something that always takes people by surprise. I mean, it's happening so fast now that it's catch up all the time. So yes, the kind of nice broad goals with very implementation-oriented recommendations for specific problems.
I think
love
that's right. I
that,
think it, 'cause
Marnie,
what-
and
I come back to the fact that I think what we're doing is trying to position the town for the ultimate presentation of the strategic plan. So what we're really looking at is where we are now and what needs to be done with the town to bring it to a position for that next stage to cope with all the things, whether it's climate change or the school programs, which are going to be monstrous, and I don't mean derogatory, wrong word, sorry.
be
They're going to be
fantastic.
challenging. I mean, there's a lot of things that we need to be prepared for, and those are kind of the elements that I think we need to sort of marshal to get the town thinking. Because one of the problems, most of that stuff never got done because it got put up on the shelf and there was never a strategic plan to follow. I think we have to assume that there will be a strategic plan that's got to follow. And that's where the zoning and the form-based, everything, all of those things have kind of, all of these things have got to kind of be assembled, what the challenges are that are coming, including climate change and all the rest of it. That's what I see is really our mission here. And
I would just take it one step further. And I know we've talked about this in the past, and it's something I always bring up, but going on my theme of accountability, I really think part of the master plan has to be implementing or recommending the implementation of a new committee that is responsible for making sure that the select board and the town manager are continuously consulting the master plan and making sure that those become priorities of the town and are addressed. Because if you think about how much time and effort and money we're spending on this, it would just be a shame for it to go and sit and collect dust on the shelf like the last one did.
Yeah.
And so anything we can do to change that. So I think it's not just about the product itself, but how do we make sure the product is implemented and actually goes somewhere. And so I think that has to be in the plan somehow, or a next step after the plan is written.
Because ultimately, the strategic plan is going to evolve. So if we have the direction of generally where it needs to end up, and we're going to know, we pretty well know that from all the work we've done with all these chapters and stuff. I mean, that's I think, I like to think, is the foundation that we've been building as an appreciation of all of the different inputs at this point. And we've got to kind of bring all that together. And one of the ones we discussed briefly, and I think Eric is planning at one point to come and do a presentation here. He's built a whole matrix analyzing where revenue can be best generated. And that's going to be a very important thing going along. That's going to be a major building block for the strategic plan as we go. And I think when he comes, and I think he is going to come, Patrick, as the plan now, and present that. He sort of presented it to a small group just to see how creeped out we were about the whole thing. And I think it would be a really useful thing for this whole committee to hear as he goes through his assumptions, what he thinks the critical variables are in the course of that, and how different modalities produce revenue, how dense the revenue will result from different approaches to things. And so, I mean, that to me is one of those critical building blocks, along with, you know, as I say, the bylaw thing is a staggering things. The zoning, the form-based zoning. I mean, these are all things that we really have got to bring together in order to build that, to then allow that strategic plan to begin to form up.
Yeah, well, I think what we had asked Eric is, how do you take this information for the existing conditions in economic development, and then you have the Prulich model that was developed in kind of all this scenario based, but how does decisions made, kind of land use decisions about some of these major topics affect kind of a per capita, whether it's service level or schools, or just kind of to help us figure out a measurement in that decision making of on different topics. I think presenting to the smaller group, which some of us were at, I think our comment was, this is just like really complex. So I think he was refining it, but I do think that presentation and information is very valuable and something to retain as part of this process. I mean, I know it's RKG, and we've talked to Patrick, how does RKG, Weston and Sampson, in a pivot direction, how does that all work together? And I think we need to figure that out. But I do think that presentation is something that's valuable to insert into how does this process and information fit into some other things that are already been created. So I agree with you.
Just to get all those pieces, which we've then got to assemble, and I think that's where the guidance is going to be really important, because none of us are total geniuses.
I want to get back to something, you know, because I think David made a really, I know I said this already, but I really do like the idea of let's try to hone in on a few specific goals. And I just want to go back to, I was thinking about, I think we were, you know, our very first foray into this, I think, was really right. The two questions were, what do we want to preserve and what do we want to create? I think that's a really strong foundation. If we actually answered those questions, I think we would have the 3 to 4 goals that David's talking about. If we really answered, what do we want to try to preserve and what do we want to create? So I just want to, because that's where we started, I believe, the entire process. And I think it's, for me at least, it's a good framework to think about. That is, like, I'm thinking about when, you know, when you're talking about getting the stuff from Eric, that's about what do we want to create? Like, what do we want to create in terms of, you know, it's complicated, but what is it that we really want to create? And then when you think about potentially climate change, what do you want to preserve? And maybe also, what do you want to create? Like, what do you want to create in order to preserve
Yeah.
Well, that's
But-
that protect, provide, and grow thing, too. I mean,
Yeah.
that's,
But I
Fits
think,
into the outline,
yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
I think it's important as we do this to try to create tools to measure and to measure our ability to get there so we can, and what the effects are, so it's not just we think this or we think that, but, you know, if we add if this many school children are in the school, that's an impact here. If we add senior housing, and that's a different impact that you might not have thought of,
talk agenda.
but that's also an impact, and kind of looking at those scenarios of
We should.
choosing something over something else, not just kind of making the assumption. So I think
Yep.
that's important, just to make sure we're making informed choices.
We're coming down to the wire, so I think what we need to do is think a little bit about what and when is our next meeting, and can we really, everybody can digest what we've been discussing, hopefully tonight, and come back with extraordinary creative thoughts and so forth. When do we want to meet next? Are we going to go back to our once-a-month schedule until we get this all thrashed through, or what's your thinking?
Well, we've been using the August the 25th date
Right,
for some production items, so I think that we need to stick with that.
so everybody's got that one clear. Okay, good. Okay, so that's our next one, and then you're going to generate
Right.
an
Something
agenda for
after
that.
Can you have Jim put the presentations from the meetings on the Google Drive?
Okay.
And then, in terms of, I know we kind of put a pause, but I think it is important to at least finish up these data pieces. So I don't know, Patrick, if you want to work, I don't know if it's updating our comments or just making sure the data's, I don't know how we want to see these elements that already exist, but I think we do need to give direction to finalize in whatever form we want to do that.
No, I agree.
And I'm okay with just kind of taking out the narrative and really keeping it to, a demographic, a demographic picture, a picture on services, however we want to do that. And then the mapping needs to be updated. And I know that you've been working with Jim quite a bit on updating all of those, and I think they're probably in a much better place. But I think we should see those on the drive as well.
And the 25th, do we want to have a discussion on Emil's table of contents as a skeleton upon which to build?
I think we already did that.
I think we already voted on it.
We've already done that?
And we voted on that.
Anybody got new thoughts about that requires further
No.
digging?
Maybe we ought to, given our vote, pardon me, why don't we put that to rest until we get the new person on board, and then reawaken it for that person's input?
Okay. And I guess in the meanwhile, if you can all take your leisure time and use it to read the 2004 and see what you think.
And maybe look at some other, this would be the consultant's responsibility and hopefully expertise and experience as well. But certainly look at some other more updated small town master plans. I think Harvard had one that was not, it is fairly recent, and I can remember looking at that. Yeah, Harvard, and I'm sure there are others, so.
On their website?
Yeah. So maybe that would be a little bit of homework too. So that's something that's a little more updated.
I think it would be helpful to look at the guiding principles that were in the 2004 plan. Understanding there was 2004 and we're in 2022. What still is resonates, and then what we might want to think about, and to then kind of sit as principles to think about those three or four.
I think one of the other things we should do somewhere, and just make sure it's incorporated into our documents, is the 2016 town survey. That had a lot of really good information, and that's not terribly remote in time. So that, having that, I know it's sort of floating around somewhere, but to perhaps Jim could make sure that he's got that in his Google Docs, so that when that's handed over to us, we can use that information.
With the 2000, we'll Patrick, you can put the 2016
Yeah, we-
survey
Yeah.
in the doc.
I have that.
Okay, yeah,
I
great,
think you already
because
sent
that's,
it around, didn't you, Patrick?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have sent that around, I
You
think,
did.
at least once, if not twice.
yeah,
Yeah, okay.
so it would be good.
All right, anything else? Anybody want to discuss? The last,
Motion to
Minutes.
adjourn, motion to adjourn?
do I have a motion to adjourn?
I just made a motion.
Is
to-
there a second?
Second.
Second?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Say aye.
Aye,
Aye.
Show of hands.
Aye.
You got it.
there we go.
Did- is she-